What happens when the galaxy's brightest alien warriors discover that the fragile human in their ranks isn't just surviving their elite combat drills? He's making them look easy. The Galactic Combat Academy was the most prestigious institution in the universe, attracting the elite students from every corner of the cosmos. It was the place where future generals, commanders, and tacticians were forged, each representing the peak of their species' capabilities. Every student was chosen for their prowess, intellect, and potential, each one a prodigy in their own right. And yet, no one had prepared them for the arrival of a Deathworlder. The term Deathworld was whispered in fear across the galaxy. Planets classified as such were places where every breath, every step could be fatal. Inhabitants of these planets did not live, they survived. They were anomalies in a galaxy that thrived on order and logic. To the students at the Academy, Earth, one such Deathworld, was a planet that should not have produced anything of significance, much less a soldier. And yet, here he was. When Rohan stepped into the Academy's Grand Hall, a wave of murmurs swept through the students. Aliens of all shapes, sizes, and colors turned to stare at the new arrival. His small, unassuming figure seemed almost laughable against the towering and exotic forms of the Academy's other students. Some were covered in bioluminescent scales. Others had skin like stone or feathers brimming with energy. A few wore advanced exosuits, while others floated using telekinetic abilities. Rohan wore nothing more than a plain Academy uniform, his expression unreadable. "Is that it?" whispered a Sagittara student, her mandibles clicking in amusement. "Humans are supposed to be fragile," said a Zalvas, a creature resembling a living crystal. "He looks like he would break in half with a single touch." The whispers turned to chuckles, and Rohan ignored them as if he hadn't heard a thing. He stood in the center of the hall, hands stuffed casually into his pockets, scanning his new environment with lazy eyes. Instructor Velra, a stern, reptilian warrior with gleaming amber eyes, called the students to attention. "Enough talking," she barked. "Today, you'll participate in a warm-up combat drill to evaluate your current skill levels. This drill is meant to be easy." A few students exchanged amused glances, shooting quick looks toward Rohan. They were certain the human wouldn't last 10 seconds. The students were led to a massive arena within the Academy, an enormous dome surrounded by energy fields, capable of simulating any environment or terrain. Inside, the drill was designed to be simple. Each student would face off against a simulated enemy one-on-one. There were no advanced weapons, no complex tactics required. The goal was to survive the encounter and defeat the enemy using whatever methods they had learned so far. Rohan's name was last on the list. The first few matches went as expected. A Grylex warrior, towering and covered in heavy armor, smashed his simulated opponent into pieces with brute force. A sleek, snake-like Velroth used her speed to outmaneuver the enemy and land a critical strike. One by one, the students showed off their superior abilities, each performance adding to the growing confidence that Rohan's turn would be a disaster. When Rohan's name was called, the room went silent. The students leaned forward in anticipation, some openly grinning, waiting for the human to embarrass himself. Rohan walked to the center of the arena, his movements relaxed, almost lazy. The other students watched with barely disguised contempt. Some even whispered bets, wagering how fast he would fail. The simulation began. The lights dimmed, and the arena shifted into a dense, dark forest filled with hostile sounds. A mechanical growl echoed through the trees as the enemy appeared. A towering alien beast made of metal and muscle, its claws gleaming like razors. It was a standard training opponent, meant to test basic survival skills. For any other student, this would have been a light warm-up. For Rohan, they assumed it would be a nightmare. But then, something strange happened. As the beast lunged forward with a roar, Rohan didn't flinch. His eyes, which had seemed so unfocused earlier, suddenly sharpened, locking onto the creature with deadly precision. He moved. To the spectators, it was almost too fast to follow. Rohan dropped low, dodging the beast's initial swipe with the grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The air hummed as the creature's claws barely missed him by inches. Rohan didn't back away. He moved closer, closing the distance before the beast could react. Crack. The sound of bone, or perhaps metal, snapping echoed in the arena as Rohan slammed his elbow into the creature's joint, dislocating one of its limbs with clinical precision. The audience gasped. This was no panicked flailing. This was controlled, brutal efficiency. The beast staggered, stunned by the unexpected blow, but Rohan didn't give it a chance to recover. He grabbed a fallen branch from the simulated forest floor, twirling it once in his hand, and used it like a club. With a single, well-timed swing, he struck the creature's head, sending it crashing to the ground in a heap. The arena fell into stunned silence. The fight was over in less than 30 seconds. The silence stretched on, broken only by the crackling energy of the simulation winding down. Rohan stood over his defeated opponent, his expression as unreadable as ever. He tossed the branch aside and dusted off his hands, as if he had just finished a casual chore. Instructor Velra was the first to recover, her reptilian eyes narrowing. "How?" she muttered under her breath, but Rohan was already walking away from the arena, unconcerned by the reactions around him. The students were in shock. Some stared in disbelief, their jaws hanging open. Others whispered furiously among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The impossible had happened. A human, the weakest species among them, had not only survived but dominated the drill. "How did he do that?" muttered the Zalvas, his crystalline form flickering with confusion. "That wasn't technique," said the Sichtera, her mandibles twitching nervously. "It was instinct." For the first time, the students felt something they had never associated with a human before: fear. Rohan returned to the viewing platform, ignoring the stares directed his way. He stood with his hands in his pockets, as if nothing unusual had happened. To him, it had just been another exercise, another day of surviving. Instructor Velra cleared her throat, struggling to regain control of the situation. "That concludes today's drill," she announced, her voice tight. Class dismissed. The students filed out of the arena, but their minds were spinning. Nothing made sense anymore. The human shouldn't have one, not like that, not so easily. They had spent their entire lives mastering techniques, studying strategies, and refining their abilities. And yet, Rohan had defeated his opponent without breaking a sweat. For the first time, they began to realize what it truly meant to be a Deathworlder. Earth wasn't just a dangerous planet, it was a crucible that forged survivors. Rohan hadn't come to learn. He had already mastered the one thing they couldn't comprehend: survival. And this was just the beginning. The Galactic Academy buzzed with whispers. News of Rohan's impossible victory spread like wildfire, igniting both awe and disbelief among the students and instructors. Some believed it had been a fluke, others claimed the simulation was faulty, and a few even suggested that humans might have hidden enhancements. Yet deep down, everyone knew the truth. Rohan hadn't won by chance. He had survived the way only a Deathworlder could. The alien students spent the next few days obsessively studying Rohan's performance, trying to figure out how he had outmaneuvered the enemy so effortlessly. They couldn't replicate his movements. Even the instructors, who had seen countless combat styles, were baffled. His actions weren't following any known martial pattern. There was no structure, no plan, just pure instinct. But for Rohan, it was nothing extraordinary. He had grown up in a world where even nature was an enemy, where every step outside could mean crossing paths with something venomous or predatory. For him, survival wasn't something he had learned in a classroom. It was a way of life. As days passed, the tension among the alien students grew. Failure wasn't something they were used to. They were the best of the best from their worlds, and losing to a primitive species like a human was an insult they couldn't bear. But they didn't just want revenge. They wanted to understand. Rohan's existence had become a challenge to everything they believed in: their training, their discipline, and their confidence in their own superiority. To truly defeat him, they needed to step outside their comfort zones. But could they survive like a human? The Academy's instructors, seeing the turmoil brewing among the students, decided it was time for a final, decisive test. They designed a combat scenario unlike any other. A massive, team-based survival drill in an unpredictable and dangerous simulated environment. The objective was simple: endure and escape as a team. Every student would participate, including Rohan. This time, the aliens vowed things would be different. Together, they would outthink the human. The simulation began with a violent flash of light, dropping the students into a chaotic landscape. The arena had transformed into a hostile jungle, dense with thick undergrowth and crawling with predatory creatures. Acidic rain poured from the sky, rivers surged with toxic water, and hidden traps lurked in every corner. This was no mere test of combat, it was a fight for survival. For the first few minutes, the alien students tried to stick to their usual strategies. They formed tight squads, moved with caution, and relied on their advanced technology to analyze the environment. But within minutes, everything fell apart. A massive predator, something resembling a six-legged panther, attacked one group, scattering them in every direction. Another team was caught in a swamp, where the toxic water corroded their armor in seconds. Their sophisticated tactics couldn't save them from the randomness of the environment. Nothing made sense here. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, Rohan moved as if he belonged. Where others hesitated, he acted. Where others relied on analysis, he trusted his instincts. He didn't wait for a perfect plan. He just adapted, flowing through the jungle like water. At one point, a student from the Zalvas species, a crystalline alien, found himself cornered by a vicious predator. The creature snarled, preparing to pounce. The Zalvas froze, his mind racing through countless combat strategies, but unable to settle on the right one. Just as the beast lunged, Rohan appeared out of nowhere. In a blur of motion, Rohan grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into the creature's eyes. The simplest, crudest tactic, and yet it worked. The predator stumbled, disoriented, giving them just enough time to escape. "Why did you do that?" the Zalvas asked breathlessly as they ran. "That wasn't a strategy." "It doesn't have to be," Rohan replied with a grin. "It just has to work." As the simulation dragged on, more and more students began abandoning their rigid strategies and started following Rohan's lead. They began to understand that survival wasn't about having the perfect plan. It was about adapting to the moment. For the first time in their lives, they stopped relying on their advanced technology, and instincts they had never truly needed before began to awaken. They started to improvise. The Seichtera, with her quick reflexes, used vines to swing across a ravine. The Velroth, usually reliant on speed, teamed up with a slow but powerful ally to take down a threat. They stopped overthinking and simply acted. And slowly but surely they began to survive. As the hours wore on, exhaustion set in. The jungle seemed endless, and the predators relentless. The students were battered and bruised, but something had changed within them. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. The final challenge came when the team reached the edge of the simulation. A massive wall stood between them and the exit, guarded by a monstrous creature. A fusion of metal and organic flesh, designed to be nearly unbeatable. The students hesitated, unsure how to proceed. They had no weapons, no armor, and no plan. Rohan stepped forward, completely calm. "We've made it this far," he said, turning to the group. "And we're still alive. That means we've already won. Now let's finish this." Without waiting for approval, Rohan charged. The others followed without hesitation, not because they were forced to, but because they trusted him. The fight that followed was chaotic and desperate. There was no strategy, only survival. Students used whatever they could find: rocks, branches, even their bare hands. They worked together without needing to be told, flowing as a single, instinctive unit. And in the end, they brought the beast down, standing victorious. The wall opened and the simulation ended. They had survived as the simulation chamber faded away. The exhausted students lay sprawled on the ground, panting and laughing in disbelief. They had done it. They had survived not just the environment, but themselves. Instructor Velra, watching from the control room, gave a rare, toothy smile. They finally understand. When the students regrouped, many of them looked at Rohan with new eyes. There was no contempt now, only respect. He hadn't just taught them how to survive the simulation. He had taught them something far more valuable. Survival is not a lesson. It's instinct. As the academy halls returned to normal, the students found themselves changed. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. They realized that no amount of training or technology could replace the power of adaptability and instinct. Rohan, as always, remained casual about it all. When one of the alien students asked him how he had done it, how he had survived so easily, he just shrugged. "It's not about being the strongest," he said. "It's about knowing that you can't control everything. So you adapt. You survive. That's what we do." And with that, Rohan walked away, his hands in his pockets, as if it had all been just another ordinary day. The alien students watched him go, feeling something they never thought they would: inspiration. They had come to the academy to learn strategy, but in the end, it was the human who taught them how to live. In the vast galaxy, filled with advanced beings and sophisticated civilizations, it was the humble Deathworlder from Earth who reminded them of the most important lesson. Survival isn't a skill you learn. It's a fire that burns within.